What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today to talk about my must-draft running backs for 2021 fantasy football. And specifically, we're going to talk about backup running backs and handcuffs and guys that, will be hyped to no end because, if the starter goes down, they could be a league winner. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not true. Not all of these running backs are going to be league winners if the starter goes down. So what we're here to do today, basically, is we're going to rank these guys if the starter goes down, what happens to them, and we're going to basically do them tiered rank. Are these elite handcuffs? Are these, average backup running backs that'd be RB2s? If the starter went down, do we not care about these guys at all? Are they waiver wire traps? All that's going to be discussed in this video today. So stick around to the end because this one's going to be a really fun exercise. One thing I want to go over, guys, because I did it at the back end of the Dynasty Decisions videos over the past couple of days, I want to talk about it at the beginning of a video so more people hear it. But we are officially announcing a contest that we're going to be running. And basically what this contest is, because I won my home league last year, I'm getting to pick the league punishment for the loser of my league next year. And what I wanted to do was have you guys pick the punishment. So if you guys have any league punishment ideas, comment any of your thoughts down below. Subscribe to the channel, of course, while you're down there. Like the video while you're down there as well. But tweet me with the hashtag pick my league punishment or comment it on any of the videos. And you guys will be entered for a chance to get a guaranteed spot in the listener league and a free draft guide. So whoever's punishment we end up using, like if you suggest a punishment that's really good, my league mates and my co-commissioners and I really like the idea, we're going to use it and you're going to get a guaranteed spot into our listener league and a free draft guide and potentially something else that I'm not really willing to announce yet. But yeah, go ahead and comment any of your thoughts down below. But all that being said, let's hit the fucking intro and let's get into this. So let's start with why handcuffs and backup running backs are important in general. And this is a really surprising thing that I found when digging into this, but here are the top 25 running backs last year in ADP. And you guys can see the guys that are highlighted in yellow missed at least 3 games with injury last year. And the guys that are also circled missed at least 5 games with injury. So you guys can see 14 of the top 25 running backs in ADP missed at least 3 games, with 7 of them missing at least 5 games. So backup running backs are important. We all know the stigma around running backs is that they get injured a lot, and which is why a lot of people, deploy zero RB to some, success. Running back position is fragile, so the handcuffs and the backups are important. And what I'm going to talk about next is who's not on this list. Who are we not going over? So I decided to exclude murky backfields where we don't know who the starter is, right? So if you guys can see on the screen right now, the Arizona Cardinals, we have Chase Edmonds and James Conner. We don't really know who's going to be the starter in this backfield. Buffalo Bills, we have Moss and Singletary. Again, we don't really know who the starter is going to be. Broncos, we have a rookie running back. Same goes for the Jaguars. We have a rookie running back and a veteran ahead of them. Houston Texans, it's a murky backfield because there's a million guys there and they all stink. The New York Jets, again, we have Tevin Coleman and Michael Carter, another rookie situation where the veteran's probably going to start right away, but then the rookie might take over, late in the season. San Francisco, it's just always a murky backfield in that situation. And then in Tampa Bay, we have, Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette and Gio Bernard. So these backfields are not included in this because, of course, if anything happened to Ronald Jones, for example, Leonard Fournette is going to be a lot better for fantasy. If anything happens to Raheem Mostert, Trey Sermon's going to be a lot better for fantasy. If anything happens to Tevin Coleman, Michael Carter's going to be a lot better for fantasy, so on and so forth. You guys get the point, but we're going to start with the teams that we know who the starter is, right? We know exactly who the starting running back is, but the backup could be valuable if anything happened to the starter. So here's what the exercise is. I'm going to be doing tiered-based rankings of the backups and handcuffs, and the way I evaluated these rankings were based on 3 factors. One, is the player talented, right? Is the backup running back, if the starter goes down, is he talented enough to do a lot with that workload that he's going to get, with that workload increase he's going to get? Next is the workload opportunity. If the starter goes down, do we have proof that this running back is going to get the starting job, basically, and going to get a feature workload in the backfield, at least 60-70% of the opportunity? And then likelihood. How often have we seen this starter actually get injured? Are they, a stalwart and they play 16 games every year, or are they banged up like Dalvin Cook, for example? And we've seen them miss games here and there, and we think it's more likely that this running back or this handcuff is going to get on the field. So we're going to start with the elite tier, right? These are the true handcuffs. These are the guys that you can say with absolute certainty, if the starter went down, these guys could be league-winning running backs. They could be highly owned on championship rosters. And if they're on the waiver wire, for example, we're dropping all of our fab budget to go get these guys. So the elite tier, the handcuffs 1 to 5. And we're going to start with the best overall handcuff in fantasy football, and that's running back for the Cleveland Browns, Kareem Hunt. Running back 26 off the board, 69 overall. We've been talking about it for years. We knew that if anything happened to Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt would be potentially a league winner here. At least he would get a big share of the workload. And we saw that, right? Nick Chubb missed 4 games last year. And in those 4 games, while the PPR points weren't, they were basically the exact same, whether Nick Chubb was on the field or not. The workload is the thing that we care about, right? 16 rush attempts compared to 11 rush attempts, and just a modest increase in receiving targets, but the touchdowns went up significantly in the games that Nick Chubb missed. The thing with Kareem Hunt, and a lot of people are going to point to this, they're going to be like, Kareem Hunt was only like an RB2 and Nick Chubb missed 4 games last year. So why are we drafting this guy at his ceiling? Well, the thing is with Kareem Hunt is that if you look at the teams that they played during those 4 games, they played the Indianapolis Colts and the Pittsburgh Steelers, 2 of those 4 games that they played. And in those games, Kareem Hunt was not good, right? He was not effective on the ground. But for the most part, at least at that point in the season, the Colts and the Steelers, by week 5, week 6, were the best defenses in the NFL. So the fact that Kareem Hunt didn't perform against those teams doesn't really shock me, because they were matchups that had yet to be exploited by running backs. By the time the end of the season came along, we saw Antonio Gibson perform well against the Steelers, Jonathan Taylor, because they lost guys like Devin Bush and they lost guys like Bud Dupree, and they lost cornerstone pieces of their defense that made their defense a lot worse. But at this point in the season, these were the baddest defenses in the league, and it was really hard to produce against them. So the fact that Kareem Hunt, you could see in the Cincinnati and the Las Vegas Raiders game, did perform. He had 18 carries, 14 carries, 4 targets, 3 targets, right? That's good volume. That's exactly what we want if anything were to happen to Nick Chubb. And speaking to the likelihood of Nick Chubb getting injured, he's missed 4 games over his 3-year career. So he's not a guy that has been banged up, but he did suffer major injuries back in Georgia. So we do have that lingering thing of Nick Chubb suffered major knee surgery in college, which is exactly what we had with Todd Gurley, right? So if there's a chance that Nick Chubb suffers a knee injury, it could take him longer to get back than another running back who didn't have that kind of reconstructive surgery to their knee like Nick Chubb did back in his college days. So that's the best running back in fantasy in terms of handcuffs, in terms of backup value. Here's the second best, and this is probably a shock to some people, but I really believed in this guy coming out of Boston College last year, and he was my RB7 in the class right behind Antonio Gibson, and that's A.J. Dillon, running back for the Green Bay Packers. And I think if all things are equal, we knock all the starters ahead of these guys out of the lineup. Who's the second most valuable running back in fantasy? To me, it's A.J. Dillon. He's currently going off the board as the RB38 in Underdog Fantasy, 119 overall. And this one is more of a projection, right? For a couple of reasons. One, we're gaining some more traction to the fact that Aaron Rodgers may return. Obviously, if Aaron Rodgers stays on the team, this has even more legs to it. I'm just kind of going off the cuff that it's a 50-50 chance that Rodgers returns, but the depth chart is absolutely barren behind A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones, right? We know that Jamal Williams signed with the Detroit Lions, and we are expecting that A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones are going to be the 1-2 punch to some extent in this backfield, with Aaron Jones getting a majority of the receiving work, A.J. Dillon contributing on early downs, potentially a bit of a split in goal line touches as well. But in week 16, we have some proof of A.J. Dillon's ability to carry a workload. In week 16, Aaron Jones actually played in this game. He missed a good portion of it with a hip injury. He left early, and he still received 13 opportunities in this game, but Jamal Williams was the important part, right? Jamal Williams was out for this game, and Aaron Jones missed a good portion of this game. So this is the best example of what would happen if A.J. Dillon was alone in this backfield. And you could see 21 carries, 124 yards, and 2 targets. And yes, it's a 1-game sample size, but it's really all we have to work with right now. This is a second-round pick that they spent on this running back, and it's a very good scheme. It's a very favorable scheme for what he does well, which is run in between the tackles. He could be very efficient to the tune of like 5 yards per carry, which he averaged last year when he did get opportunities. And even though he was a rookie, we have a handcuff sample that we can use if Aaron Jones were to miss any games. And one of the better values in drafts right now, in my opinion, A.J. Dillon, with Jamal Williams in Detroit and the Packers' high propensity to run the ball, Dillon might even have standalone flex appeal, especially if Aaron Rodgers is no longer on the roster. They might really, really focus on running the ball to the tune of what Tennessee does, basically, which is where LaFleur came from. And that RB1 ceiling that he has, if Aaron Jones misses time, is real, because I think he is, far more talented than some of these running backs in this elite tier. And Jones has missed 10 games in the span of his 4-year career, and he has only played 16 games one time. So in my opinion, I think A.J. Dillon has some very, very good handcuff appeal and is a very good backup running back to invest in. Unfortunately, if Aaron Jones doesn't get hurt early in the season, you might be in a situation, if you don't have deep benches, where you have to drop the guy or trade him or whatever the case is. But he's definitely a guy to stash. If you have your draft before preseason games, go get this guy, because if anything happens to Aaron Jones in the preseason, this guy is legitimately going to be a second-round pick in fantasy come August. So AJ Dillon, another guy that I'm really high on for, handcuff appeal and backup running back appeal, and is a great mid-round pick as an RB3, RB4 on your roster to, roster some of that ceiling in case anything were to happen to Jones. So RB3, Tony Pollard, running back for the Dallas Cowboys, running back 36 off the board, 112 overall. We know this one's elite, right? We know if anything happens to Zeke Elliott, then Tony Pollard is going to be phenomenal. We saw it in one game last year. He averaged 31.2 PPR points per game to the tune of 9 targets, 12 rushing attempts of opportunity. So Tony Pollard was phenomenal in that 49ers game that Zeke Elliott missed. But the problem is that Zeke Elliott has missed 8 games in his entire 5-year career, and 6 of those were to suspension. So he has missed 2 games in his career to injury. This is a very durable running back. He is not a guy that gets injured very often. It sounds like he's in better shape than he's ever been, which, I mean, we hear that every year at this point in the year, but nonetheless, Zeke Elliott's still a young running back. He's still 26 years old. I don't think he's suddenly going to be a guy that, the workload catches up with him and he's going to be an injury-prone guy. And we know that Tony Pollard really has no value in terms of standalone value if Zeke Elliott is on the field. So this is a guy that, unfortunately, if you draft him, is probably going to be a guy that you end up dropping by week 5 because he's not going to have a standalone role. And Zeke Elliott, if he's performing well and if he's staying healthy, is going to be, a top 10 running back. This is a guy that you blow your fab budget on, right? Because he is obviously going to be phenomenal if Zeke Elliott misses time. But I only have him at 3 here, even though he definitely has a case for being the best handcuff in fantasy. I only have him at 3 because Zeke Elliott is a durable running back, and it's very unlikely that he gets injured. You guys can see 30 games in Tony Pollard's career that he's played. Only one of them was without Ezekiel Elliott. It is very rare that Zeke Elliott misses games. So RB4, Latavius Murray. He is the 4th best running back handcuff in fantasy, in my opinion. RB43 off the board on Underdog, 134 overall. Now, much like Tony Pollard, we have a small sample of when Alvin Kamara was out. What did Latavius Murray do with that volume? Well, he's missed 2 games in the last 2 years, Alvin Kamara. And in those games, Latavius Murray just went bonkers. 34 PPR points per game to the tune of 9 targets and 24 carries when Alvin Kamara was out. And he had 4 touchdowns in those 2 games. So this is a guy that legitimately has, top 5 running back overall potential. If anything were to happen to Alvin Kamara and he missed like significant time, like blew his ACL out or something, this is a guy that could absolutely be a league-winning running back. It's a very small sample size, of course, right? Since Murray's been in New Orleans, but 33 opportunities per game is nothing to sneeze at if anything happens to Kamara. So Kamara's missed 1 or 2 games pretty much every year the past 3 seasons. But if he were to ever miss significant time, Murray is the guy that slots right into that RB1 conversation. And the final guy in this elite tier is Alexander Mattison. RB48 off the board on Underdog, 155 overall. He might be the best value of all of these elite guys because he's going, almost as the 50th running back in fantasy. And again, much like Latavius Murray, much like Tony Pollard, we have a small sample of when Dalvin Cook has been out of the lineup. You can see 16.74 PPR or 75 PPR points per game. Not as much as Latavius Murray and Tony Pollard, obviously, but the volume is there, right? 15 rushing attempts per game, 2.5 targets, 18 opportunities per game is nothing to sneeze at. And if you look even deeper, you can see that Dalvin Cook last year, he missed, I believe it was the second half of the Seahawks game in week 5, and then he missed the entire game of the Falcons game in week 6. And you could see 30 carries and 5 targets over the course of about 6 quarters for Alex Mattison is very good. And Cook has missed 21 games of his 64 potential that he could play in his career. And while he played 14 games last season, again, he still missed 2 games. He's absolutely a risk to miss significant time at any point because we know he has concerns from Dr. Edwin Porras, who talked with us last year on our channel, talking about Dalvin Cook's shoulder concerns. He always has a risk to separate his shoulder. We know about his ACL reconstruction and some of the lower body injuries that he's received. And again, this is a guy that's had a pretty big workload over the past couple of years. So he's always a risk to miss time with injury. And you can see per Sports Injury Predictor, they actually label him as a high risk, and they have an 87% chance that he's going to miss games with injury next year. So, I mean, sure, he could miss, 1 or 2 games, and that, accomplishes that 87%, but they project him to miss 3 games next year, which is, if you get Alex Mattison for 3 games, he's going to be a high priority waiver ad. And if those 3 games happen early in the season, or if it's a significant injury that Dalvin Cook suffers, then he could be a guy, again, that could absolutely win some people some leagues. But again, only a guy that I'm willing to draft as a wait and see on my bench. I wouldn't go out and draft this guy in every single league that you're in, because there is a good chance that Dalvin Cook doesn't miss significant time. And he plays 13, 14, 15 games. And you roster Alex Mattison for 4 weeks and then you drop him because Dalvin Cook didn't get injured. So the 91 octane guys. So these are the guys that are not elite handcuffs, right? They're not RB1s, top 5 running backs if their running back goes down, but they definitely would be more fantasy relevant if the starting running back went down in their offense. And they might even be borderline RB1, top 15 running backs, but more likely they're mid RB2s if their running back goes down. And you guys might be surprised that I have some of these guys in this tier and not in the elite tier, but these guys are not sure things, right? We assume they'd get a big workload if anything happened to the starters, but we don't know for sure because we've never seen it yet. And I would say, like I said, they're guaranteed RB2s, but not necessarily RB1s. And the first guy that I want to talk about that you could make the case should be in that elite tier is Gus Edwards. And Gus Edwards is going off the board as RB40 right now, 122 overall. But the reason he's not in the first tier for me is the Pittsburgh Steelers game that we saw last year, right? Both Mark Ingram and J.K. Dobbins missed this game. And Gus Edwards was set to be, I think he was in my top 15 running backs in the weekly rankings that I did that week. He got 9 carries for 10 yards and no targets pretty much. He had absolutely no receiving work. Here's the reason why. Because Justice Hill had 9 carries for 35 yards and he had 2 targets for 5 yards. So when Ingram and Dobbins were both out last year, Gus Edwards did not play a primary role. They split time with him and Justice Hill. And it's probably because Gus Edwards is a 0 in the passing game. They basically, they trust J.K. Dobbins to be a early down back and a third down back, but they don't trust Gus Edwards in that role. So if anything were to happen to Dobbins, the likely scenario from what we've seen from this coaching staff before is Gus Edwards is the early down guy and Justice Hill is the guy on third down. So that makes him more of an RB2 type than it does an RB1 type if anything happens to Dobbins. But like I said, he's still going to be more valuable, obviously, if J.K. Dobbins goes down, and he would still be worth, a high priority waiver wire ad if he was out there or something like that. And then the next guy that we're going to talk about, very similar to what we've seen from Gus Edwards, is Darrell Henderson. And currently going off the board is RB41, 127.5 overall. We've actually seen a sample size of him as a starting running back on the team. Cam Akers was dealing with a rib injury from weeks 2 to 7 early in the season. And we also had Malcolm Brown banged up a little bit as well. And then in week 16, Cam Akers was dealing with a high ankle sprain. So we have like a 6-7 game sample size of Darrell Henderson being the starter. And you guys can see what his, workload was on the screen. He was a, 40-50% snap share guy, primary ball carrier, but not heavily involved in the passing game. And the workload looks pretty good, right? Like I would agree. The workload is pretty good, but here's my issue with Henderson and why he's not higher. Cause if you really believe in the guy, like as a talent, then you could argue that he should be in the elite tier if anything were to happen to Akers, because that depth chart, much like the Green Bay Packers, is barren. There's really nobody behind Henderson and Akers because Malcolm Brown is now with the Dolphins. There's nobody behind them, but I just don't think he's a very talented player. Number 51 in juke rate last year. He's not very elusive. He wasn't elusive at Memphis. He's just a fast player that runs very fast in a straight line. And he was number 37 in yards created per touch, number 47 in production premium, like 30th in yards per touch, like 4.3 true yards per carry. He's just not that talented of a player. And a running back can get a workload, right? If anything were to happen to Akers, he absolutely would get a pretty decent workload, but he still does. It doesn't make him an RB1 just because he's getting a workload, because he's simply not talented enough. And again, that's my opinion. And that's how I feel about Henderson. He's simply not talented enough to be an RB1 if anything happened to Cam Akers. So again, a good RB2, probably a mid RB2 if Akers went down, but not a guy that's probably going to win you a league necessarily. He's more of a guy that, if you picture Wayne Gallman from last year when Saquon got injured, that's more what I see from Henderson if anything were to happen to Akers. So RB8, another guy that, you could argue it should be higher on this list, but Kenyan Drake, running back for the Las Vegas Raiders, running back 42 in Underdog Fantasy ADP. And 128.5 overall. I've made my opinions pretty clear on the roles that I see them, adopting in this offense. Drake, obviously being now in Las Vegas and not as a primary ball carrier like we saw from him in Arizona the past 2 years, I think he's going to go back to what he was prior to getting to Arizona, right? The 2016 to 2018 Drake, that pony style third down back that we see mixed in for 150 carries or so, 125, 150 carries and like 50 receptions. That's what I see out of Kenyan Drake in 2021. And Drake has shown an ability to handle a workload, but he hasn't been very good with it. So if Josh Jacobs goes down, I could absolutely see Kenyan Drake doing this because he's done it in the past. He could be the classic guy that pops off at the end of the season because he has fresh legs and the starter went down. And Kenyan Drake, the final 6 games of the season or whatever, is like a top 10 running back in fantasy. But my thing with Kenyan Drake is that if Jacobs were to miss significant time, right, let's say he blows his ACL out in week 1, I don't think Kenyan Drake is a good enough player to we saw exactly what he did with a high workload last year in Arizona, and he didn't really do that much with it. I think the exact same scenario would play out in Las Vegas. And of course, he would be more valuable, obviously, but not a guy that's going to be a league winner necessarily. So Jacobs has missed 3 games in his 2-year career so far, but he's played through a litany of injuries. So I expect him to be a relatively durable guy. I don't think he's a guy that's going to suffer a big time injury, because we've seen him play through shoulder injuries and the flu and pretty much everything that you could imagine for Jacobs he's played through. So he's a guy that I don't expect to be an injury prone player, and therefore Drake be more valuable from that perspective. So the final guy in this tier, and then I'll probably speed through these last 2 tiers of running backs because they're less important, but Chuba Hubbard obviously is a guy that's going to be very valuable as a handcuff because RB55, by the way, 195 overall per Underdog Fantasy. I think it's lazy to assume, though, that he's just Mike Davis, right? And what happened to Mike Davis last year, if Christian McCaffrey goes down, is going to happen to Chuba Hubbard. I definitely think that the staff has shown that they're willing to give a big role to whoever the backup running back is if CMC goes down. But Chuba carried a big workload in college and is certainly still a talented player from what we saw in 2019. Not necessarily last year when he was more banged up. I think he's a pure handcuff, right? We know if CMC is on the field, he is getting all the snaps, all the carries, all the touchdowns, all the receptions, everything that he wants, he gets. But if CMC goes down, Chuba Hubbard is going to be a guy that is a high priority waiver wire ad, and I think can be a back-end RB1, low-end RB2 type, much like Mike Davis was last year. Probably not a guy that has top 5 upside, probably not a guy that has top 8 upside. I just don't think he's talented enough and don't think he can contribute even as much as Mike Davis did in the passing game last year. I think that's a big knock on Hubbard's play as a running back. So a guy that is definitely going to be valuable, but not necessarily a league winner type. They do have Trenton Cannon on the roster. He can contribute as a running back in the passing game. I think that's probably the likely split you would see if CMC went down, that Cannon comes in on 3rd down and Chuba Hubbard gets most of the carries and stuff. So then we're going to get into the fringe workload guys, which is what I called this tier. Basically, if the starter went down, they absolutely gain value, right? But are they worth a high priority waiver wire ad? Are they worth league winner status? Are they worth drafting? More importantly, because we're drafting and not actually in season right now, are these guys worth drafting with the, side implication that if anything happens to the starter, they're going to be elite for fantasy? So these guys are Jamal Williams, Kenny Gainwell, Damian Williams, Darrell Williams, Ramondre Stevenson, Chris Evans, and Devontae Booker. So these guys are waiver wire traps, in my opinion. If any of their starters, let's say DeAndre Swift goes down, is Jamal Williams a high priority waiver wire ad? Absolutely. But is he a guy that I would want to spend all my waiver budget on? No, because I don't think he's talented enough to carry a huge workload. We've seen what Jamal Williams can do with a big workload when Aaron Jones has missed time, and it hasn't been spectacular. We've seen what Jamal Williams can do in an awesome situation in Green Bay last year, and he wasn't that efficient. How are you not efficient in what the situation was Green Bay last year? Like, to me, that just proves that Jamal Williams isn't that good of a running back. And I'll just go through these guys one by one. Kenny Gainwell is too small to be a feature back. If Miles Sanders goes down, they're going to use some kind of split or some kind of committee regardless. So Kenny Gainwell, yeah, he'd be a 3rd down back and you'd probably see an uptick, but they'd use, Kerryon Johnson or whoever their early down back is sparingly as well. So that's not a situation I'd be really excited about either. Damian Williams, again, David Montgomery goes down, Tariq Cohen's going to be involved still. Darrell Williams. If Clyde Edwards-Helaire goes down, I'd actually put my money that they actually sign somebody, whether it's Le'Veon Bell, Todd Gurley, whatever the case is. Darrell Williams would be valuable, but he wouldn't be that valuable. Ramondre Stevenson, again, it's the New England Patriots. If Damian Harris goes down, Damian Harris's role alone isn't even worth RB1 type potential. So Ramondre Stevenson, if he takes over the starting job because Damian Harris went down, he's probably still only a back-end RB2 because James White would be involved and whoever else that they have will be involved still. Chris Evans, I just don't know how talented the guy is. If Joe Mixon ever went down, Chris Evans could probably carry the workload, but I don't think Samaje Perine or anything like that's in their backfield right now goes away necessarily. I think it would just become a committee in general. Devontae Booker, same thing. If Saquon Barkley goes down, I think they use Gary Brightwell. I think they use whoever else is in that backfield, and they potentially sign somebody as well, whether it's Devontae Freeman or, Todd Gurley or Le'Veon Bell, whoever else is out on the waiver wire at that point, they'd probably sign somebody if Barkley got injured again. So like I said, these guys will be hyped as guys with RB1 upside if the starter goes down. But in my opinion, they're more likely to be fringe RB2s than anything, like basically what we saw from Frank Gore last year, because we don't know if they'd get a full workload, 1, and 2, if they're talented enough, if they do get a big workload, to do anything with it. So that's my thoughts on that kind of tier. And then here's the I don't care tier, right? Like if the starter went down on certain teams, I actually just don't care. I wouldn't pick up anybody. I wouldn't, I'd speculative add them on waivers, but they don't have a lead upside. They probably wouldn't even be RB2s if the starter went down. So any pass catching back fits into this category, right? If David Montgomery goes down, is Tariq Cohen suddenly an RB1? No. If Jonathan Taylor goes down, is Nyheim Hines suddenly an RB1? No, they would split time with Marlon Mack and Jordan Wilkins and Nyheim Hines if Jonathan Taylor went down. If Antonio Gibson goes down, is J.D. McKissic an RB1? Absolutely not. They would put Peyton Barber as the early down guy, J.D. McKissic on third downs. So, and then in the Titans too, if Derrick Henry goes down, is Darrington Evans suddenly an RB1? No, absolutely not. They would use Jeremy McNichols. They would use Darrington Evans. They would use whoever they have. So any pass catching back doesn't fit into this category. Just if a starter goes down and it's a pass catching back immediately behind them, they keep their role. Usually they'll see a slight uptick, but they'll bring in a banger to fill the early down role. At least that's what most coaching staffs do. And then these other backfields are just ones I can't really sort through, and I have no idea what would happen. So the Chargers backfield, if Austin Eckler goes down, Josh Kelly and Justin Jackson will split time. Like, that's just what's going to happen. If one of them's injured, obviously the other one would be more valuable, but if they're both healthy and Austin Eckler goes down, they're going to split time, and it's going to be a headache to figure out who to start. The Pittsburgh backfield, they all stink. So I don't even care if Najee Harris goes down. If Benny Snell, like, I mean, he'd be a waiver wire ad, but he wouldn't be valuable. And same goes for whoever else that they have there. And the Dolphins backfield, if Myles Gaskin goes down, Malcolm Brown, Jared Dokes, Sullivan Ahmed, these guys would all be mixed in to some degree. This one's a little bit more interesting because we've seen them use feature backs, but I don't know who it would be. My guess is that it would be Malcolm Brown, but I don't really know. It could be Sullivan Ahmed, could be Jared Dokes. So that would be one that I would, add somebody from the backfield if somebody got injured, but don't necessarily draft anybody. Falcons backfield, they all stink behind Mike Davis, so I don't care. Bengals backfield, again, they all stink behind Joe Mixon, so I don't really care. And Chris Evans would be the only one that I would remotely care about. And then the Seahawks backfield, Rashad Penny, literally has played 3 games in his NFL career. Can't stay healthy for the life of him. And, DJ Dallas, whoever else is in that backfield, they all stink. So Chris Carson goes down, not necessarily guys that I'm interested in. So if you guys did enjoy this video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe. Like I said at the beginning, if you have ideas for a league punishment for my league, comment them down below or tweet at me with the hashtag #PickMyLeaguePunishment, and you could win a free draft guide and a guaranteed spot into the listener league and something else in the future that will be announced once we have a winner. And so if you guys enjoyed that, as always, peace out and enjoy your Monday.
Why you need the money?